Welcome to Bards and Barrels, the podcast for Dungeons & Dragons players new and old. I'm Ross Druce, and I'm joined by my friends and co-hosts Brett Miller and Phil Boone. We'll be exploring the world of Dungeons & Dragons in each episode, sharing our experiences, offering tips and advice for those who play and run this classic game. So whether you're a new player just starting out or a seasoned veteran looking to get a new perspective on things, Bards and Barrels has something for everyone. So sit back, grab a drink, and join us as we roll for initiative and embark on an epic adventure. And there's the opening crack. It's time for another episode of Bards and Barrels. I'm Ross, along with me for the ride, as always, Brett and Phil. Fellas, how we doing tonight?
Doing great.
Great tonight.
Ooh, two great.
Very enthusiastic. I love it.
I should have planned that better, I guess, but it's fine.
We're totally doing that for our guests. We're just showing off. It's fine. With that said, we do have an excellent episode lined up for everyone tonight, and that's going to include our special guest. So without further ado, he's known on social media as Crit Hit the Giant. He's on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, and Twitch, where he creates videos and discussions about his beginner's journey into Dungeons & Dragons and other TTRPGs. He also has a games, news, and reviews website called The Games Lair, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. A big B&B welcome to Sean Winningham. Sean, welcome.
Woo! Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, you were one of the very first people that reached out to us after we got going. So if there was ever, I don't want to call you a cheerleader, but if there was ever a cheerleader that was just like, hey, somebody out there other than your friends and wives are listening, and our wives don't even listen.
Hey.
Well, maybe your wife does, but mine doesn't.
Yeah, sometimes.
So, Sean, tell us a little bit about like what you do and how you've got into the whole like nerdy world that we live in now.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I don't want to go into a deep dive. So before I got into, tabletop role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons and all that, I was really, a big comics guy. I used to have a podcast about comics called The Caption Life, and did that with a couple of buddies of mine that I met through Twitter. It was a lot of fun. But in terms of games and stuff, I've always, my wife and I have always played games ever since we were dating and everything. So games have always been part of our lives. But when it comes to specifically Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games, I remember hearing about it a little bit in high school, but the people that would talk about it were really into it. And I'll be honest, it just seemed really intimidating to me when they talk about that stuff, because it's all, it's very complex, and there's a lot of back history and lore and stuff that kind of goes into it. And so I never really got into that scene. And I would play one-shots every once in a while with my in-laws because they played Dungeons and Dragons, but I only played with them when we did family reunions, and they had us, just kind of jump in and play and all that. But what really got me into Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games is that a couple of years ago, I was just trying to find a movie or show I wanted to watch on Amazon, and I just saw this random commercial or trailer for this show called Legend of Vox Machina. And watching the trailer, I was just like, oh, this looks really interesting. Watched the show, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I watched the whole series. I think I stayed up to 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning because I just really loved that show. And so at first I was just like, oh, this is a great show. I really like it. Then later on, I found out that, it's all inspired by Critical Role, who's a, Dungeons and Dragons actual play stream, and looked more into that. And I just really thought that it was really cool, what they did, and watching their Twitch streams, and just how they, did the voice acting and got into the role-playing side of it, which I've never seen before with Dungeons and Dragons. And so I really liked that part, because in high school and college, I was really into theater. I'm a very dramatic guy. I like to, if you ever watch my videos, I'm very larger than life kind of. I like to embellish and kind of make things, exaggerate and stuff like that. So I'm a very dramatic guy. So that really appealed to me. And then, last year I live in Indy. Last year was the first year I went to Gen Con, and that was just an amazing experience as well. So I wanted to get more into this world of tabletop role-playing games. So I found a local gaming store that was, not too far away from us, connected with people who also wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons. And so now I'm in, I think, 2 or 3 Dungeons and Dragons games. I'm doing Candela Obscura, which is a game from Critical Role, and I've been just doing some one-shots, and then pretty soon I'm actually going to be DMing a kids Dungeons and Dragons game at my gaming store. So it's in a span of a year, I'm just dove headfirst into this world of Dungeons and Dragons. So yeah, So that's kind of the short of it.
That is awesome. One thing we always get asked is how did you form your first party that you joined? Like, did you know those people that you were playing with for the first time, or did you just meet them at the game store, or how'd you get roped in?
Yeah. Yeah. So, if I put aside my in-laws that we did the one shot with, because, that was like missed me kind of jumping in and playing, right? The first group of people I actually got to play with was a buddy of mine who I knew from comics podcasts. Like, he and I have talked about Dungeons and Dragons in the past, and we both wanted to get into it, but we just never have. And so he actually found a one shot that was being offered online through I think Start Playing was the website, but we did it through Roll20. And so we did this one shot online. He and I absolutely loved it and thought that the DM of that game, Nick, was, so great. He has a podcast as well about Dungeons and Dragons called the Raised on D&D. And we just it was just probably the best one shot experience we could ever have. Like, it was just a little bit of everything that you wanted to have that experience. And so after that, he and I, my buddy Derek and I had said that we wanted to continue that on, and we wanted to see if the DM Nick was going to offer some more. So oddly enough, he did, and that's actually something that we started back in September, I think, and we're still doing it to this day. It was first a 4-session Dungeons and Dragons, and it was just it technically was like 5 of us, and then went down to 4 of the players, and so we're still playing, but then we've had 4 more people that joined the group as well. Wow. Too. So my first experience has actually been online. Yeah
That's a big party. That's awesome.
It is. Yeah. And we did our first session with the entire party 2 weeks ago, and I was a little nervous about how that was going to go with them, but I'll be honest, they were all fantastic. It can take a minute to explain what happened. I thought was just so great. Okay. Sure. So real quick, it just opened up in this tavern, and I played a Dragonborn barbarian. And of course, we start getting into a fight because some people, started fighting, was starting to fight us, basically, some orcs and goblins. But the 4 people who joined the party that didn't know, they weren't part of the past campaign and all that, they were kind of brought in and said yeah, you're going to help us out with this. And, and there's a whole backstory to that. I'm not going to bore everybody, but one of the characters just he was a rogue, and he was just I don't really know these people yet, so I'm just going to go to the bar and order a drink on his turn.
That's awesome.
And then the wizard kind of did the same thing. Is I wonder if there's something weird about this place. Let me go, hit detect thoughts and see if there's something going on upstairs and all that. So we're half of us are fighting, and the other half is just kind of looking around the tavern to see if they can figure out if there's anything that they can find and all that. So it was a lot of fun. I was really kind of just hesitant about it at first, because I didn't know how that would play out with having that big of a group, but they were all fantastic. It was a lot of fun. So it's been a great kickoff for that so far. So yeah.
So obviously there's some pretty fun antics going on in this story. I think a lot of parties struggle with role playing and things like that, especially in their first time groups. Obviously not a problem there. Do you have any players that struggle with that? And if so, how did you get them comfortable with playing with everybody else?
Yeah. And it's funny because I think when people think of role play, they always, think of the more embellished side of things, right? The voice acting and the dramatics and stuff like that. And really role playing, doesn't have to be to that extent. It's just, kind of sharing what the character is going to be doing in the dialogue and stuff like that. And so, so far we haven't really had anybody that seemed to really struggle with it. In this particular campaign, what's been really interesting is that we use Discord in between sessions, because we're only meeting every other week, to kind of have us play out our characters in between, travels or, nice. The night before or something like that.
Nice.
Yeah. So we kind of text, what's going on, and what are the conversations we're having and stuff like that. And I love that, because I think it allows it to kind of progress without being confined to, the 4 hours that you might be doing that night. And you're not really progressing the plot necessarily in terms of the adventure and stuff like that. But that's an opportunity for you to kind of make those connections with your character and the other characters and kind of fill in the details. So it's like, if you think about a movie, like how there's like low points and you kind of, the pacing of it is like you go really fast and you want to slow it down and have like some of those conversations. That's what the Discord really comes into play and help. Some people are really into it. I'm admit like I'm really into it. Like I'm somebody that I like to type up a whole thing for it. Other people aren't, and that's totally fine. And I feel like it's one of those things where if they didn't participate in it, they're not going to be missing out on anything when we actually do it in the session and all that. But yeah, I mean, everyone seems to be really getting into it. And I think there's various levels. Like a few of us will do voices. The other few will just kind of like talk about what their character is doing. So like I talk as though I am my character, unless there's a reason why I have to say like, my character is going to do this. But most of the time I'm talking as my character, and other people say, well, this person is doing this, blah, blah, blah. And it all works really well. Like, I don't think everybody has to do it the same way. Everyone kind of gets it. And you want to make sure that everybody has that great comfort level. So that way they can enjoy, doing the game without feeling pressure to do it a certain way, like the other people are doing the party. And I think everybody's really enjoying it for the most part. So no one seems to have left yet. So that's good.
That's good. Excellent.
Yeah.
Let's take a minute and back up because I don't want to lose this in the shuffle. You talked about Gen Con. Tell us a little bit about your experience there, and maybe for folks out there who don't know what Gen Con is, maybe fill them in a little bit on that as well.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard of Gen Con, it is, if it's not the biggest, it's one of the biggest gaming conventions, I think in the world. Like, I think it's been compared to one of the biggest in the world. I know a lot of people say like it's up there with the Spiel, that's out in Germany, which is a really big one. But it takes place in Indianapolis at the convention center. And I think last year they had a record-breaking attendance ever since they've had in Indianapolis, which I think was about 23 or 25,000 people that attended, which is a lot. Gen Con was first started, the name comes from Lake Geneva because it was started in Wisconsin, where the creators of Dungeons and Dragons actually had like a convention for, Dungeons and Dragons, stuff like that. So it was there for the longest time. And then in 2009, they moved in Indianapolis because Indianapolis has a really great setup with their convention center, a lot of hotels and everything. And so it's been really great. In fact, last year, they actually announced that they're Indianapolis were going to add more to the convention center, and the people that run Gen Con was there as well too. So, but it is a gaming convention where I think it's been focused on tabletop role-playing games for the longest time, but there's also board game companies that'll go there. So, Ravensburger has been there. The company that does Lorcana, that was Ravensburger. Disney Lorcana, that was a big thing last year. Like there was people like lined up out of the hall and everything like that, like the night before, just to try to get a spot to get some of the first Disney Lorcana cards. But that's where they debut like a lot of board games. There's a lot of like play test, and so you can go there and play different kinds of role-playing games. They have like a 4-day, if you want to do like a 4-day long session of like, Dungeons and Dragons or other kind of role-playing games that they have there, you can definitely do that. They will have companies that will have that sell tickets to people to like test out their games before it hits the market. But they also have booths where they're selling games and everything as well too. So it ranges anywhere from tabletop role-playing games to board games to they have trading card games. My son, went there last year with me as well, and he did the Pokemon thing that they had, and where you got like the deck and got to open it and play against other people. So a whole wide range of games. The only thing they don't really have a lot of is like video games. So if you're looking for video games, that it's not really what that is for necessarily. I know there's some other conventions that have that, but it's huge in tabletop role-playing games. There's 25,000 people that went last year. You definitely notice the size, but it's not overbearing, at least, or overwhelming on how I see it, because I feel like I still have space to kind of walk around, stuff like that, because the convention center is so large. So it's the biggest one in the nation, but the convention center is so wide. If you've never been to Indianapolis, there's a convention center that's made up of like 4 or 5 different halls. It is connected to Lucas Oil Stadium, which is where the Indianapolis Colts play. And I tell you what, like if you go, definitely check out what they have at Lucas Oil Stadium, because they have like just all these other things. Like I think True Dungeons is where they have some of their stuff, which is like a company that does like, it's almost like maybe like escape room, but like in a dungeon or something like that is what I've
Cool.
been told. I haven't actually,
Nice.
tried that out or anything like that. But they also have like a huge library of games. If you just want to, go there and just play games, that they have just kind of sitting out there, you could do that as well too. So if anything that's gaming related, if you're interested, Gen Con is definitely a big one that a lot of people go to, and it's one of the most popular ones in the nation. So
I think I don't know if it was from you. Well, definitely it wasn't from you because you lived there, so you wouldn't have been going through the airport. But I think it was actually
right, yeah.
Indianapolis's airport post that they had a section set up for people to play games while they were waiting for their plane at the airport. I'm like, that is how you know that convention, and you know the people that
They
are
know
in
their
town.
people.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
awesome.
Exactly.
yeah. Oh yeah, everybody knows it. Yeah, I mean, even though I went last year, for the very first time, like all the years before when I'm driving downtown, like you knew Gen Con was in town because there were so many people just walking around and had like, the big game packs and cosplay and stuff like that. So yeah, Indianapolis is all about Gen Con when it comes in town. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, with all of your experience in comic books, different board games, just all across the board, how has that influenced how you play D&D, or has it at all?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because I feel like when I graduated from college, like I didn't really do the nerdy stuff that I did in high school and college and everything, right? Because like you're an adult, so you need to start acting like an adult and stuff. I kind
I
of
can't
did
do that anymore.
adult thing. Yeah.
Right.
Right. And so I just kind of got away from it for a while. And then about 6 years ago, I came across Marvel Unlimited, which is their app service where you pay, a monthly subscription and you get access to the whole library digitally. And that's what got me back into comics. And so that's really opened the doors to kind of looking at like what did I enjoy, in life, not just, as a kid, but just things in life. And the nice thing about it is like I'm actually sharing that enjoyment and that experience with my son as well. So he's been along with the ride with me, and he's actually been loving it. Like I always want to make sure I'm not like kind of pushing it on him.
Sure.
And it's interesting because I didn't even like when I started getting into Dungeons and Dragons, I didn't even bring that up to him if he was ever interested in that. He just, brought it up on his own and said that he wanted to try that. And we got him into our gaming store and he absolutely loves it as well too. And so it's just nice to be able to share that experience with him and kind of live through him in that regard of like, the excitement, enjoyment of doing all that stuff. So like we've been doing cosplay stuff. Like he would dress up as Miles Morales and I was dressed up as Kingpin, and we do like comic book covers and things like that.
Nice.
But when it comes to like, Dungeons and Dragons and how some of that stuff has influenced it, with me loving like being a performer, right? Like in high school, I was 6'6". A lot of people expected me to be like a football player, especially with my size. Like I'm a very broad shouldered guy, which is another reason why I love Barbarian, because I just feel like that really fits kind of my persona in a little bit. But I actually did just a lot of performance in high school. I did theater, I did show choir, I did improv, like, Whose Line Is It Anyways? Our high school had like a group for that.
Nice.
So a lot of that stuff, I think, really influenced me trying to, and how I do D&D is being able to like utilize some of that stuff. But also just trying to think of like just very different ways of trying to see interesting ways to play different characters, especially the role playing stuff, right? Because I feel like you see a lot of tropes, and there's nothing wrong with tropes, but you see a lot of tropes that are being used that are like, something that is, I feel like, is safe and familiar that really helps people kind of get into the role playing side of the game. But now I'm starting to get to a point where like I want to kind of break my own personal comfort. Like I'm always going to play a Dragonborn Barbarian because that's like my favorite race and my favorite class. So if I'm going to do something, I'm always going to try to figure out how am I going to do a Dragonborn Barbarian. But I've also been exploring how to do different things or different characters to just kind of break that boundary of what I'm comfortable in, but just makes it an interesting story as well too. So one of the characters I created was actually a half orc druid, because I feel like you never really see a half orc be a druid. You always see him like barbarian or fighter or something like that. So I thought that was like a really interesting character that you can really make. And then another one I've been working on is a barbarian, but a drow barbarian. And I thought what would be really interesting is that because drow has sensitivity to sunlight, so they have like disadvantage to attacks and stuff like that. I was like, how cool would it be to be in a game that you're a barbarian, but at some point, if you're like in direct sunlight, you have to like kind of work through that. So not only like mechanically as attacks would work, like how would you work that as a character as well too. So one of the things I like to do when I'm in like combat mode is like I try to bring out some sort of personality or aspect of my character. So I don't just say like, well, I'm just going to swing my axe and hit this guy. You know, I'm kind of like think about what's happening in the moment, that what would the character would say or do, and kind of incorporate that as well too. So I thought that'd be like a really fun way to do that. It's like, you know, trying to hit somebody, but you have disadvantages. So you're just like, you know,
Right.
like really bright or something like that. So, so a lot of my experience from, you know, performance and everything really kind of dove into the role-playing side of trying to do Dungeons and Dragons and wanting to tell interesting stories in addition to doing the fun combat side of rolling the dice and see if you can attack and kill the monsters and villains and all that. So
Nice. So I think that's a great segue into talking about the game of D&D itself.
Wait, we do that here?
Just a little bit. Well, one of the things that's kind of our cornerstone of what we've done thus far is talking about like how to play the game, how to get new players in. It's like we've been playing for a long time. We want to share our experience that, you know, you don't necessarily have to have somebody that's been playing for years to get involved in this game. Like you can take the handbook and dive right in. As a newer player, what is something that you have like maybe it's a mechanic or something, but what's something you have struggled with in terms of D&D 5th edition?
Oh man, yeah. You know, there's actually a lot. Like as much fun as I've been having and as much research I've done, like there's a lot of little things that I think I just don't realize, and I think it comes to a few things, right? So. First of all, I gotta say, when I started getting into D&D, just like what you guys said, your podcast like kind of came on the show, kind of came on the scene. So it's kind of like perfect timing for me because I would listen to your episodes and kind of learn a little bit more about the different classes that you all had talked about. So that was always helpful. But I think a couple of things that's been like really helpful, but also is also it's helpful for people to kind of get introduced to that world, but then you have to kind of almost unlearn it and then relearn it as well too, because you kind of got introduced to it in a different way. Is D&D Beyond was really helpful in trying to figure out like how to do the character creation and how to do stats and stuff like that, because it walked you through it and it did a great job of doing that. But then sometimes like I just forget that because of my, you know, race or because of my level of class and stuff like that, like I have advantage on, you know, initiative rolls, and I just completely forgot about that. And like one time when we were playing the game, and I was just, and that was one of the times where I was just like, I rolled really, really low, and as a barbarian, want to go first so you can try to take out some people early on.
Oh.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like one of those things where like now I'm trying to teach myself, like I need to kind of read through the different feats that I have and think about, try to keep them in mind for some of these things, and not just that, like what you have in your inventory and all these like things you have, because it's like keeping track of those things seems like it's easy, but because a lot of those are really conditional, it's easy to forget about those things, because like that may not be something that's useful until like 3 or 4 sessions down the road.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, I forgot I could have done this sort of thing. Right. Baldur's Gate 3 was a really great way of learning the game, but there's a lot of differences with the video game that they had to adapt to the actual tabletop role-playing game. So like some of those things I've had to learn, especially as a barbarian, like the frenzy strike is very different in how they do it in the video game versus the role-playing game, stuff like that. And so I think it's like those things have been really helpful, but you also have to still, like, I think it's a good introductory way to get started in the game, but you still have a lot to learn with it. But I think everybody's always going to say that the spells are always confusing.
Right.
Like I feel like I got a good understanding of it, and I love Sorcerer because it's a little bit more straightforward. But then there's things like, you know, I actually made a TikTok about this the other day because people were pointing this thing out that I just try to do an example of one of the frustrating things about Shadowheart's attacks, and I use Firebolt as an example. But the thing about Firebolt is that it's actually a cantrip she has as part of her race and not because of her class. And so as a class, as a cleric, right, her spellcasting ability is based on her wisdom, but the Firebolt is actually based on intelligence because it came from her race. So it's like those little things, you know, just gets really intimidating for people who might want to be a wizard, but there's just a lot of stuff that goes into that.
So much.
So I think it's always like the obvious stuff, but again, D&D Beyond kind of helps you with that a little bit. And then once you get kind of like more of the intricacies is where you definitely need to have somebody who's been playing it for years to kind of help you understand a little bit more like what's going on in the character sheet and what you can and can't do with your abilities too.
Yeah, see, to Sean's point, this is why I can give you guys so many magical items, is you don't even know what everything you can do.
Perfect.
Fair. That's very fair.
Yeah.
There are so many little nuggets to any character, especially after you get past level 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They just scale so quickly that if you jump in and try and go straight to level 7, good luck trying to remember all those little nuggets. But I think
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why a lot of campaigns start low levels and work you up so you get comfortable with some of those little details of your character over time.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
I-
exactly.
I think you all have made excellent points because it's like there's just so much stuff when you get started with the game. It's like it's hard to keep everything straight. Starting at level 1 does help so much. So when you get people that are like, I want to start at level 5, I'm like, are you sure you really want to do that?
Have you
Yeah,
played
but-
before?
Prep.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing is that so beginning players, this isn't necessarily a big deal, but like if you're playing in 3 different campaigns at the same time as a newer player, because once you realize how much fun you're having and you're playing, but you want to play all the time,
Sure.
I think that's when you really realize that the player's handbook becomes. It truly is a guideline for the rules. Yeah, they spell things out for you, but every DM has their like little things that they do differently from everybody else. And so it's like
Right.
not necessarily like spells so much, but let's talk about quick. Let's talk about quick. That's the
Quick
operative
is
word
a
here.
bad word here.
Trademark.
Passive perception. There's a lot of DMs there. 2 of them at this table right here that I'm sitting at that don't use passive perception. Now, my question to you is, do you use passive perception? Or have you used it at any of the tables you've been at?
Yes, I know the campaign that I'm using or that I'm in right now. There's been times where he's like, like we've been surprised by someone like showing up and all that, and then that's when he used the passive perception. And I think he either had our character sheets or maybe he just kind of asked for it ahead of time or something like that. But I know he has used it before. But I know that's something that's usually used typically for trying to determine if you get surprised or not.
Sure.
And so that's happened a couple of times as well. But yeah, I mean, the ones I've been at, one of them has. The other ones that I participate in, I don't think it ever really came up, or if it did, I wasn't aware of that as a player. So, but yeah, I mean, it's again, it's one of those things where it's like, at first glance, I was like, what is this passive perception? Like I have like a +6, perception over here. Like what's this passive, BS I'm reading about like right here? And so when I looked into it, I was like, okay, that's interesting. And again, D&D can be very intimidating at first, but I think D&D Beyond and, like what you all have said, like starting at level 1s and things like that can really help with getting someone started. Because I know when I was in high school, it just seemed really intimidating when you just like kind of get all that information kind of thrown at you at once. It's all about like taking those baby steps. It's like there's a lot that goes into it, but you don't really need to have a whole lot to really just get started and play as well too. So but yeah, I'm sorry to answer your question. Yes, I have.
Okay. Hey, that's fine. And I think another good example of passive perception, since we've been talking about Baldur's Gate already, is when you're walking around in Baldur's Gate and then the game just rolls passive perception and it just says failed and you don't know why it failed and you're wondering what's going to come around the corner or what didn't I find because I just failed that perception check. And I feel like I fail every damn passive perception check that it rolls for me. I'm like, just let me roll the math rocks. Come on. I Shadowheart can give me a couple extra dies to roll on that. Just let me roll myself. That's all I need. All I need.
So one of the things that we picked up on is you have been into Baldur's Gate 3 a lot. And Ross and I just started playing. We're kind of behind the times. We missed the first rush and we're finally getting into it. But man, you have had some hot takes or starting some discussion on social media with the controversy of the rope in Baldur's Gate 3
Oh
and
my gosh,
how worthless it is.
I tell you what, like I when it comes to posting those videos on social media, like I don't know what I'm doing in terms of like, how people talk about like you need to do like SEO to figure out like if it's going to go viral. I don't do any of that stuff. Like I'm just like, this is funny to me. I'm just going to post it. And so it's just really interesting to see like what takes off and like what triggers a lot of people. And rope was one of them, like it was just so funny to see the comments, like how wide ranging it is. But yeah, like rope is pretty much useless. Like you don't need it to like climb down anything. It doesn't give you that option. Somebody did say that you could use it to like, block vents, but I was like, but that's anything. Like it doesn't have to be rope at that point, Yeah, just so many people had like a lot of like, yeah, I agree, it's so useless, or like this is more useless, and people like, oh, you're not using it right, and all that, and like, yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I absolutely love the game. Like, obviously, like I have a tattoo that uses the frenzy symbol from Baldur's Gate 3, so I love the game that much, right? But yeah, I mean, there's just some things that I'm just like, it's not like I really hate it when I talk about those things, but it was just like, I think it's funny to kind of, just make a video and kind of talk about those things, just, right. But yeah, I actually I got the game in August, and I just finally beat the final battle last night.
Oh, nice.
Actually.
Nice.
Yes. Because you'll probably experience this. Like, we get halfway through and you're like, I want to do a different character and go a different route, because you can have like so many different things that you did not like interact with or didn't have the option or stuff like that. And so it gets really addicting of, I want to try, something else. And the Dark Urge is a great thing that they've implemented in that game as well too. But yeah, the rope was a controversial one. The one I posted yesterday about Shadowheart missing everything was really controversial. I shouldn't have used the firebolt as an example, because everyone's just like, well, that's your problem. I was like, no, this is for any attack. I just used that example because that just happened, and I was really pissed about it.
Hey, it's
You're like, well, why are you using that? Well, it's like, because like that was the only thing I could really do with the situation. Like, that's the thing,
Okay, backseat.
It's not like I wanted to.
It's so.
And it was against goblins, like the weakest, characters.
Yeah,
it still missed.
It is so true. And then like on your third TPK, and you're like, why can she not roll? If she would hit the damn thing, we would not be in this position right now, and I wouldn't rage quit. Oh my God.
Yeah. But you do learn that it's interesting because they're already like built in the subclasses and stats and stuff like that. So like Shadowheart is a cleric, so a lot of people use her as a healer, but she's her subclass is like trickster. Mm-hmm. And what's really good for healing is the life domain subclass, because it has a lot more options and stuff like that. So like I didn't learn about that until I think like 2 months ago. Like, so when I was halfway through Act 2, I was like, why did I didn't know about this earlier? Like, why did they start with trickster? And I think it's probably to do more with her story than it is anything else. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, if you find, the one character, you can go and change anyone's like class. So a lot of people talk about how they changed her to like a Paladin and all these other classes as well too. So yeah, it's just fascinating, like what you can do with this video game.
I give Larian Studios so much credit for what they put together here, because maybe you haven't noticed this as much, but recently, well, a year ago, I guess, we wrapped up. We went through Descent into Avernus. We played through that entire campaign. It took us 2.5 years to get through, pretty much. The little tidbits within that opening area, like where the tieflings are in the elf enclave and they're refugees and they're saying they're from El Terrell, and then they're talking about all of this stuff. And I'm like texting Brett. I'm like, oh my God, did you hear this? Did you see that part? It's like, we know exactly what that is. It's like, I love just the little tidbits of lore that they put in there that they don't have to do, but it's added so much depth.
There's no point to adding that to it, but it's just a little Easter egg.
Adds so much depth to the game, and I think so far I've loved everything about it, and I think you had mentioned earlier how like it's a good representation of Dungeons and Dragons, like the actual sitting at a table playing the game, but you can also see in places where they've had to tighten things up. Like, you can't spend time doing X or Y because this is a video game. You're not sitting at a table doing this, and gosh, I can't even come up with a good example off the top of my head. Those passive perception rolls might be a good one, because if we were in an actual game sitting at a table, I would probably ask Phil, if he's our DM, hey, can I roll a perception check out here to see if I can see something? It never asks you when you're wandering around, do you want to roll a perception check? It just lets you fail your passive perception, and then I get pissed about it. But have you come across things like that you noticed as well? Like where they've changed like D&D, like the game you play at the table versus the video game.
Yeah, so like the biggest thing is they cap it at level 12 for character progression.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was really interesting at first. And when I heard about that, I was like, I wonder why they capped it. But I read an article and it actually explains this pretty well. And it kind of makes sense because it's not something I would have thought of because I'm new to the game and I'm, like the barbarian class and kind of stuck to that a little bit in the sorcerer class. But, they said like it's hard to implement some of the, abilities like when you get a wish spell, right? Like how do you do that? Which, it kind of makes sense because, that's so broad and you can't really confine that a little bit. It's like, how do you give people an option to use a wish spell? Which they kind of did with like divine intervention. They, I don't know like how that actually works in D&D, but when you use divine intervention, there's like 5 things that you can pick from. Mm-hmm. The one from the barbarian I mentioned about before, the frenzy strike, in Dungeons and Dragons, the tabletop game, you get a level of exhaustion if you use that, right? Which means that after you get out of your frenzy stage, then until you take like a long rest or whatever, you have that condition, which means that you have to throw for disadvantage for like strength checks and stuff like that. In the game, like they really couldn't implement that really that well, I guess. And so it was like something where as you use it more often, then your chances of actually hitting like, I guess, lessons or something like that along those lines. So, so those are some of the biggest things that I've noticed. And gosh, there's something else I remember, like, just like, oh, that's very different from what I remember from the game, but I can't remember on top of my head. But I remember like that was a big one for me. And then the level, how they put the cap on level 12 for the characters too.
It was probably the usefulness of the rope.
Yeah, that too. I had so many people like, yeah, I played tabletop Dungeons and Dragons. You always need rope. I collected all the rope. I beat the game, but I still had that in my inventory. Never touched it.
Does the game have ball bearings? Most important question.
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I haven't played
one of my
rogue.
favorite things.
One tip I will give everybody as somebody who just beat the game, like use those scrolls. Like,
shoot,
I have so many scrolls that I remember thinking I want to use this as like a last ditch effort resort. But by the time I beat the game, I still had all these scrolls. I still had I think I had like almost 30,000 gold pieces. I was like, I should have like spent that money. Like, what was I thinking? So the second round, I'm like using scrolls and like spending money. Like,
spend that money.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, that's $5,000 for that armor. Yeah, have all at it. I'll get some more later on. Yeah.
Yes.
So definitely spend that money and definitely use those scrolls because you don't need to, you don't need to hoard all of them. You definitely can use them because there'll be enough out there for you to use.
Not saving for retirement.
Why not?
So speaking of capping off at level 12, I think that's one of those factors that a lot of campaigns even trail off at up those higher levels because it gets hard to balance anything, even in real D&D or a video game especially.
I think some of that too even falls to the like the adventure books. A lot of them only go up to like 13th, maybe 15th level. Not that many will run all the way to a 20th level character.
No, Phil's got his work cut out for him because we're headed back into our Descent to Avernus campaign extending on. So get ready, Phil.
Right, and we're at level 13. What's the highest level character you have, Sean?
Right now it's I got my D&D Beyond open actually right now.
Don't we all?
I think it's level 7.
Okay,
yeah, level 7. I think we're going to level up to level 8 right now.
Nice.
But yeah, this is the highest I've been in an actual campaign.
Nice.
For Dungeons and Dragons level 7, and this is the barbarian one, and so that's been really interesting. I know level 8. There's other things that'll be coming down the pipeline and everything like that. So, but yeah, so I haven't got to that point yet. I'll be really interested to see how that all, shakes down once we get to those higher levels and what more stuff I have to keep in mind of like situations and moments of like, oh, I could use this because I have this, ability and all of that. So, yeah.
It's like if you think your character sheet is full at level 1 to 3, wait until you get to 13 to 15 because then it's even deeper.
I bet.
You're definitely in the sweet spot now. Like 6 through 10, 6 through 12 is perfect for D&D.
Right.
I mean, as a barbarian, though, keep swinging. That's
Absolutely.
that's what
That's-
you're gonna get.
That's
Swing
the-
more.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like Barbarian, I feel like, is a little bit more straightforward of like what you can do and all that. Like, yeah, I have these like little, abilities, but it's like, oh, I can attack twice with my great axe that has like a +1 on attack rolls and stuff like that. Like, I'm just going to slash at this guy and hopefully I'll hit, and like that's all I have to really focus on and just start swinging. I don't have to think about like, oh, I'm going to use a spell, but I have to like pay attention to if someone tries like a counter spell or like the environment, whatever. It's like I just take my axe and I just try to get it right at that guy's neck, right? Like,
Right, for sure.
There's
Yeah.
something very satisfying about being a barbarian.
oh yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
Tubby.
yes, absolutely,
Yeah. All right. Well, Sean, thank you so much for coming on the show. If any of our listeners want to give you a follow, where can they find you at?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the show. I really love your guys' podcast, and it came at a perfect time for me when I started Dungeons & Dragons, so I really appreciate you guys. If anybody wants to follow me online, all of my social media, like Threads, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and all that, it's all under the same username, Crit Hit the Giant. And I also have a website where I'll post, gaming news or articles or reviews and stuff that I will write about for not just tabletop role-playing games, but I have board games on there. It's called The Games Lair, and you can go to games-lair, LAIR.com, and you should be able to find everything there.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Bards and Barrels. It was great having Crit Hit the Giant on. I hope you come back. We didn't scare you off or anything.
Oh, no, definitely. Yeah, I'll be happy to come back on anytime. Yeah.
Love it. You can listen to past episodes of the show anywhere podcasts can be found. If you want to stay in the loop and not miss the latest from us, be sure to head over and give us a like and follow on Facebook or Instagram at Bards and Barrels. We'll see you soon.